insights that you have shared, and all of this we will discuss as we go along. Um, I now go to our third panelist, Dr. Dennison. Dr. Dennison, will you take us through the foreign migrants in Malaysia and about the Indian diaspora in Malaysia? How do you see them, and what do you think the contribution has been like? And just take us through it, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to participate. I'm also among friends, and this is interesting. Just as a backdrop, Malaysia is not a very large country in comparison to India or the US. We are only about 30 million. We have about 671 cases, and so far the death is 103. The government has introduced immediate cash transfers, food assistance, and special assistance for SMEs, SMIs, and so forth. But the major impact is the movement control order that affects migrant workers, refugees, undocumented people. And in the context of the Indian diaspora in Malaysia, it will be the bottom 40 self-employed, informal sector. The movement control order, while our cases are low, the arrest of people during this period is over 21,000 people were either imprisoned or fined because they violated, because they had to go out, or they didn't have a valid reason, although we were not in curfew. That's the background. And there are some issues with democracy and the parliament sitting and so forth. But when we come to migrant workers, we have something like about 2 million migrant workers, majority of whom are from Indonesia. But we have a sizable number from Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, and so forth. They work in the agriculture, construction, service, domestic sector. I think they have been badly hit during this period because of the movement control order and their conditions of living. Most of them are sharing living space or rooms because they might be on shift work and now being confined and without cash because the government assistance and subsidy makes them vulnerable during this time. But it's worse off for illegal migrants who, in that sense, are also around but would get arrested if they come out. They are at higher risk because they are not prepared to go for testing or treatment, and they are in shabby living conditions in that context. And this brings home the issue of refugees, because in comparison to India and Bangladesh, our refugee problem is 180,000 people registered with UNHCR, of whom over 140,000 are Rohingyans from Myanmar, and the remaining 21,000 from other countries. There has been an increase of stereotyping and anger from local people towards the Rohingya community. The boat people were sent back, and there was a lot of reaction to that. In the midst of all these negativity and difficulties, because the assistance doesn't come from the state to undocumented or illegal or refugees, but civil society has been very active, including faith-based organizations to reach them, and the UNHCR. Another critical group are undocumented, stateless people who largely in the peninsula would be people of Indian origin who used to be in the plantations, and they face issues during this period of time on screening, medical treatment, testing, even financial aid and support, because they cannot get it through the Department of Social Welfare and so forth. Among the Tamil or Indian community, we are about 2 million diaspora community. I think the top end is okay, or those who are salaried and in office and so forth. But it's the people at the bottom end and people who are in manufacturing or SMIs or SME as workers, but badly hit are flat dwellers living in high-rise living, informal sector, single mother, contract workers, daily wage. There is talk, we don't have data by ethnicity, increase of domestic violence, increase of indebtedness, because you need to buy their financial reserves are not enough. Unlike other countries, we don't have adequate social protection mechanism or unemployment benefits. So the bottom section, we call it the bottom 40% faces, but they too have received assistance through members of parliament in terms of rice or dry provisions. And I think this is where the real struggle is towards post-COVID kind of development agenda. What kind of economy do we want? The kind of neoliberal economic policies that has caused inequality or unfair wages in this context. They need to build resilience of these communities who have been very disempowered in the period. The need for retraining. I think other speakers have highlighted the whole e-commerce, internet, and how people at the bottom can move their production or produce in that way is quite critical. I think struggles not only in Malaysia but also other Asian countries vis-a-vis migrant workers and refugees is most of our countries in Asia have not ratified the Refugee Convention or the Migrant Workers Convention. So the human rights protection during this period could be an area of concern. I've seen, and whether it was just media stereotyping India in terms of policemen beating people on the street and things of that sort. It's a common scene that we saw. But those are some of the issues that people are struggling with. But at the same time, COVID has also helped galvanize community spirit in terms of solidarity, in terms of people re-looking at how to link rural and urban vis-a-vis vegetable producers, or even people talking about becoming the food security issues, whether urban farming, those kind of things we need to develop. When I was last in New York, unused land in the city was given to different people to do urban farming, organic, and things of that sort. But really linking new ways to strengthen local economies and move away from these big production plantation type and foreign investment driven sort of kind of economic development, because people are really feeling the pinch of it during these periods of time. Now, in terms of ethnic relationships, I think people in communities are beginning to see how at the local level they network better with their neighbors vis-a-vis security or help or assistance. I think the the strengthening of solidarity is there, and also the increased usage of facilities like this through internet and other forms to keep communications going, other features that we are seeing. These are some of my thoughts, and I can come back to if you all feel there are other pointers you want to raise from the Malaysian example. But I think we need to be cautious in Asia, especially during this time where political forces are taking upper hand through undemocratic means, through policing or human rights violations. And because of the lockdown, the accountability, public spending, and these things can be issues of question that requires. And of course, the other is global cooperation, because all countries are affected. Then the level of cooperation we would have got from certain countries or our support, because all of us seem to be in a vulnerable global position and the lockdown of this kind. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Jayasuriya. And I couldn't agree more with you that while these are really bleak times for us, but we've seen unprecedented camaraderie between people and incredible courage as people have come together. They have tried to help the dispossessed people. And we have also seen unprecedented, repression from the government, taking advantage of the lockdown situation. A certain kind of police estate is slowly being imposed upon us. So both the points very well taken. And yes, we need to discuss them further.